Hi, all. Good evening. Welcome to this short webcast on the 7 steps to create a powerful brand story this lovely Friday evening. Thank you so much for registering for this webcast and making time to attend. Just a hygiene announcement before we begin. If you have any questions during the course of this webcast, kindly make a note of them in the question and answer box, and we'll be happy to take them. We have some questions that we received during the registration, which we'll be taking up after this webcast. So, without further ado, let me begin. I want to keep this short, power packed, and to the point. So, folks, this is my very favorite quote which I really use at a lot of places, which is from Seth Godin, and it beautifully says that marketing is not just about your features of your products that you sell. It's about the stories that you align with those products. And it beautifully conveys and sets the context for what we are about to share with you. Before I get into the topic, I would like to introduce our organization, our company. So we are a boutique brand storytelling company. Our aim is to humanize brands through stories, no matter who your target audience is. Having said that, personally about me, hi, I am Rohan Poddar. By formal training, I am an engineer and an MBA. I passed out of my MBA way back in 2007, post which I was in various corporate sales and marketing roles in IT organizations, IT companies. At some point in my career, I felt the need to follow creative pursuits, and that's when in 2016, I started this company as a production company. And from that point on, we have built a small team of dedicated people, and we've gravitated towards becoming a brand storytelling company. We are really passionate about helping clients find their brand story. I would like to introduce the second speaker, in fact, and over to you, Mandar.
Hi, thanks Rohan. Thanks so much. And I extend a warm welcome to our attendees today. Similar to Rohan, I come from a engineering and a MBA marketing background. Post my MBA, I primarily was working with IMRB International. I was handling brand tracking surveys for Unilever and a few banking clients. I am there with Rohan, I guess, for the last 6 to 7 years. It's been an amazing journey where we are trying to humanize brand communication for employer branding, product branding. And that's our dream. Project by project, that's what we are trying to achieve. So I once again welcome you to this short webcast. Over to you, Rohan. Great. Why we choose this topic today? Surprisingly, we all are leaders in the marketing branding space. Now, why storytelling is important for us, right? Why is a story more than a typical marketing initiative, a typical sales initiative? The crucial difference here lies the primary goal of an ad can be to take an immediate action, and that's where the brand story differentiates itself, right? It tries to create a very personalized, relatable narrative to create a deeper emotional connection with the audience. And the other prime aspect that I feel of a brand story is to create a sense of community among its consumers. Now, that is what really differentiates it from an ad. Uh, I don't need to elaborate much on this. We all understand the power of storytelling. It helps humanize a brand. It gives a brand a personality. A story which can stick in the consumer's mind much longer when he's taking a decision. And in today's crowded marketplace, it is also very important for a brand to be really authentic in its communication with consumers, to share its growth journey, the challenges, the success and the failures that it has faced. Apart from that, a brand has multiple stakeholders, uh, not just the team internally, but also the manufacturers, the entire distributor chain, the retailers, with whom the brand team has to communicate through stories. It has to find various touch points, and I guess that is the reason why the people who registered for this workshop, they come from various functions within the marketing. Uh, I guess that's the context for today's webinar. I would ask Rohan to take this ahead.
Right, thanks, Mandar. So,
Thanks.
any discussion about brand storytelling should begin, in our view, with the universal life truth model. It's not as complicated as it sounds. It's very simple. It What it means is that uh, whatever happens around us is a circumstance. We cannot control those circumstances. When you get in your car and you hit the road, the traffic that you encounter is a circumstance. When you get to the airport and the flights gets delayed, it's a circumstance. If you get laid off from a job, that's a circumstance. These circumstances we don't control, but these circumstances trigger some thoughts in our mind. Now, those thoughts could be positive, negative, depending on our mental condition. These thoughts are just in our mind, but thoughts create emotions. Emotions are nothing but physiological manifestations of your thoughts. So, for example, if you ever felt grief, you must have felt a lump in your throat, right? That's a strong emotion right there. Emotions lead us to take certain actions in real world. It could be doing something, it could be calling up somebody, and these actions then lead to further results or repercussions in the outside world. So this model governs the universal human psychology. What we have done is we have used this model to understand how do we create stories better that relate to your audience. And let me explain you that. Before I dive deep into the seven steps rather of the brand storytelling, I would like to take an example. I would like to discuss these seven steps with reference to a case study so that it's not just an academic discussion, but there is some practical air to it. So let me take an example of a B2B debt lending platform or a fintech company. And this has been inspired from a real life scenario, right? Now let's assume that the head of the brand says that he says that we as an organization or as a brand, we work with several SMEs to help them service their debt requirements, understand them, cater to it, and we have helped to contribute to the Indian economy by helping small and medium enterprises. And he believes, the brand head believes, that we have a story to tell there. We know that we have made some impact, but he just doesn't know how to tell that story. Now, starting with this as our case study, let's see how do these seven steps help him create a brand story that would make sense to him. So, first, before you begin any brand story effort, you need to know what is the object you are trying to achieve, the outcome, right? Primarily, there are three major objectives that any brand would intend to achieve by the brand storytelling they do. First is they want to create an emotional association in the minds of their audience. That means whenever they think of a brand, they think of it arouses a certain emotion, or they think of a certain keyword. Brand preference, they want their audience to take a certain action after watching that story. So it could be like it could be buying their product, it could be signing up for something. Brand loyalty is where you want to create a sense of belongingness, a sense of tribe amongst your loyal customers, right? So these are the three broad overarching, I would say, objectives of brand storytelling. In our case, now let's get back to our fintech company. So the fintech company brand head said that his overarching objective is to transform their growth numbers. So their growth numbers include their revenue figures, the low level of their NPAs, how many clients they have serviced. All these numbers point to something, right? What is that story, right? So they want to transform these numbers into a story that's relatable to other people. So that was the overarching objective. Now let's move to the second step of the brand storytelling, which is every story has to have a primary target audience. You should be knowing whom you're speaking to. If you're speaking to everybody, I guess you don't really have a story to tell, right? So you should be very clear whom you're speaking to. These are some of the stakeholders, target audience, I must say, for a brand, your customers, suppliers, investors, so on and so forth. Of course, customers are the biggest target audience for a brand, but we just want to show that there are other target audiences. Now, in our case of the fintech company, for them, the target audience were SME owners with a revenue turnover of 10 to 50 crores. These are first or second generation entrepreneurs, business owners who are trying to get something done across India, across industry sectors. So there was not anything involved there.
As you must all have realized, we are trying to get some method into the madness of a brand story by using the 7-step methodology. And the next step is to conduct an emotion audit, which is quite often called an EAR triad in our terminology. Right. So, in simple words, what's an EAR triad? We are trying to capture attention of our primary target audience, create an emotional connection by slowly guiding that audience towards a specific intended action that we want to convey with this story. So that's a very simplified version of this EAR framework that we are trying to achieve. With respect to our specific example of the fintech, when we look at this EAR triad, the primary emotion that the end user has is anxiety. Anxiety quite often caused by lack of sufficient working capital, which might impact his business revenue for that particular month or quarter. And using the EAR triad, what we as storytellers try to achieve is identify this emotional trigger, identify the personality of the audience, and then address that fear. The next step in this entire process is about understanding the brand value. What is that? See, a brand might have multiple values with which it is connecting with its audience because they might be using multiple services for multiple product lines and multiple audiences. So the story needs to focus on one primary PTA, identify the core brand value that needs to be communicated here. And this brand value with respect to our client was the power of possibility. Now, for an SME in relation with a fintech, what does this power of possibility mean? It means the power to see new dreams, the power to explore those opportunities which without the help of the fintech funding, the SME would not be able to explore. So this association is what gives this SME the power to think of those possibilities. That's where we link this value with the brand story.
Right. Now, the next step to is brand narrative, right? Now, so far we've understood the brand values, the emotions of your PTA. There are universally 5 narratives that are applicable. If you pick any movie, Hollywood, Bollywood, it would fall under any of these 5 narratives. So the top example that comes to my mind is the movie Guru of Abhishek Bachchan. It's a rags to riches story, right? But what do these really mean? So overcoming the devil means a story narrative where the protagonist faces off with a very strong villain or antagonist, or it could be a very bad situation which he has to fight, which threatens his existence. Quest for change is that the protagonist is not happy with his current situation. He wants to change the status quo, right? Return voyage is exactly opposite. An external situation changes our protagonist. It changes his trajectory in life to something really different, and he wants to come back. The example that comes to mind is the movie Raju Ban Gaya Gentleman, where Shah Rukh Khan comes to Mumbai to become a civil engineer, and he really gets into cesspool, into deep trouble, and then he wants to go back, right, to simple life. Creation or rebirth is typically inward loop. So something happens in your life which really forces you to transform the way you think. It changes you as a person. That's the creation or rebirth story. And Rags to Riches is where the protagonist elevates his life situation to something better than what it was before. Now, universally, most of the stories that you see will fall under any of these. Now, we choose at this stage, we choose that narrative that makes most amount of sense to our brand story. Again, this is a creative call, a subjective call, and one could argue that one narrative is better than the other, but that's something that is for brainstorming. In our case, for our fintech company, we chose the rags to riches narrative, where it involved our protagonist, which is the SME owner. He's thinking out of the box to really change and to raise his fortunes, right? And get his and leave behind his past. So that was the narrative that we realized. So now that we know this is the narrative we want to build, how do we now break down the narrative? So the next is breaking down the narrative because we want a story nonetheless, right? So we want a context, characters, what are the conflict that the characters face, how they solve those problems, they land at a better place than they started, and there's a call to action. Every brand story should have a call to action which asks its audience to do something. In our case, uh, Here's the story. So it's a tier two town SME owner, and he inherits a ailing tea processing unit from his father. But his unit is in loss. It's not, the workers have left the factory, it's in doldrums. But this guy, young chap, is confident of turning it around. However, the banks, they don't see any value in lending money to him. And that's where our brand comes into play. The power of possibility comes into play. That's where his anxiety matches the optimism of our brand. And that's how you fuse a wonderful brand narrative. Filmography.
Right. Now, once we have chosen a broad narrative, it's also very crucial for us to understand what might be the best way of expressing this particular brand story. Now, this, like Rohan mentioned earlier, is a very qualitative call with respect to the objectives that the brand has. So we need to choose from one of these formats. It can be a live action video. It can be a series of small episodes built into an episodic podcast series. It can, if it's going to a print medium, it can be illustrations and caricatures. So this is highly customized in our consultation with this fintech or any assignment that we have. With reference to specifically our brand, the fintech, we chose a short live action film to convey the story to this audience.
Now, everything that you do should be obviously measured in terms of its effectiveness. So, three universal effectiveness parameters for a brand story. First is call to action. As you remember, the last five C's of the five C's was call to action. So, whatever that call to action would be, signing up for something, filling up some form, visiting your store, buying from your online store, or it could be just being a part of some community, right? Whatever that call to action is, if your audience, a certain percentage of your audience takes up that call to action, that means your brand story has been effective. Engagement parameter and engagement metrics are more at a tactical level. Social media engagement metrics, likes, comments, shares, etc. Qualitative feedback is where you reach out to a sample set of your target audience, you show them your story, and you get their feedback. This could be pre-launch of the story or post-launch of the story, right? To understand what really moved them, what really touched them. And this is a qualitative exercise. So these are three ways by which you can assess the effectiveness of your brand story. Now, here at this point, I would love to introduce something that we call as a storytelling idea camp. I'll just move this here. Essentially, we get all the brand people or the communication people in one room. It's a collaborative exercise. The idea is to use this methodology that you just saw to come up with brand ideas that you've never thought before. Uh, these stories that are lying in the nooks and corners of your organization, of your thinking, of your campaigns, how do we get them out? How do we create and see which one of them are really feasible to do? Right? This is essentially what this exercise is about. Where essentially the first thing it does is helps your brand managers become better storytellers. That means they're able to spot stories wherever they are hidden in your organization. The second is this helps them humanize their communication with their stakeholders. As I said, brand stories ambit is huge. It's not just restricted to your customers. Yes, largely it is useful for your customers. That's where the maximum number of brand managers work on. But it's useful for a large number of your target audience. Brand association, I've touched on this point when I was talking about in an earlier slide. We want to create the right brand association. That's primarily the responsibility of your store, right? And once you know that these are the stories that you can really tell and you are convinced about them, when you know that these align with your brand, these align with your target audience, you're essentially you're creating a business case for investment in business storytelling. You can go to your CMO, head of brand, or your CEO and present a case that these are the stories that we think are viable, they will run. We have done the testing, we have done the narrative building, we have understood our audience, done the emotion, or this is what has led to. So essentially, this is what we offer through our ideation camp. If you think this makes sense to you, and this is like a calibrated approach to get into brand storytelling, you're welcome to be in touch with us, to contact us. I've kept this session small and short purposely because we also want to take some questions that we received before during the registration phase. Suffice to say, you can reach to us on this email ID that you see here. We'll be sending you a copy of this presentation that you just saw, as well as this recording will be uploading on YouTube for your consumption. Now, there are some questions. I think Mandar has a question. Why don't you begin one?
Right. Thanks, Rohan. Uh, so it was a trick question. When our team assimilated all the questions, I guess we had about 15 to 16. And our apologies for the ones which we are not able to take up. We'll be taking up 3 questions today. The rest of them we'll personally answer on email IDs that we have. So the first question that I had from our team was Rituparna Ghosh, who heads CSR and Corpcom for Linde Group. And his question was quite interesting. In an age of content and media overdose, how do we really grab mind space? Now, Rituparna, thanks for your question. I wish I had a simple answer to offer to you. It's like summing up our brand storytelling journey in a few sentences. But what I liked about your question and I would like to highlight is 2 words that you use: grab and mind. So it's physically impossible to grab someone's mind, right? So there are 2 things which I would like to share with you today. What makes an effective brand story? When you want to grab mind space, the first factor that as storytellers that we consider is personal relevance of the story. So we carefully curate the EAR triad and the PTA, the primary target audience and its profile, so that the story is personally relevant to his growth journey. That is what helps us to create it more effectively. And the second critical factor for a successful brand story over here is what we call as narrative transportation. What this means is, will the story be able to transport this listener, this reader, this viewer to a different world or a scenario where he can imagine he is part of the story, right? Can we engage his senses, heighten his focus? And that is where this 7-step process that we discussed previously will help us do that. So these 2 factors, making the story personally relevant and the creative narrative transportation of the story. These are 2 things which we need to consider to grab mind space. I hope we were able to answer your question. You can also connect with us later for a more detailed discussion. Rohan, you could take up the other 2 questions that we have.
Sure. In case anybody has a question, they can now will be a good time to share those questions. But let me take a question that we received from Mahendra Shrikumar. He's a community growth specialist at avatar.ai. And he asks, or rather, he comments, making relatable brand content is very important, is something that I've understood over time. But that seems easier in B2C. How do we identify what aspects to focus on when we are creating content in B2B space? And that's a very interesting question. So, Mahendra, what I can say is a story is a story. It's a B2B or a B2C. At the end of the day, a story is meant for people, right? And people are emotional beings. So, for example, if you're selling it to a B2B guy, the absence of your product or your service will create some problem in his job or in his performance of his systems. That will trigger some emotion, some anxiety within him, or create some fear in him. What is that emotion that will get triggered if your services fail, or if because of lack of your services? If you are able to identify those emotions, conversely, it could be positive emotions. So, for example, we worked with a leading testing equipment brand, and they basically we created a story which talked about their customers, which are the small and medium businesses. And the story focused on how SMBs are contributing to Indian economy. But at a second layer, if something fails in their operational efficiency or how they operate, it can have a huge consequence for them. So, for example, for a small cement plant, if a boiler fails, you that would be catastrophic, or rather, it could have an impact on their long-standing business, right? So that's why the testing equipment has to be critical. So we viewed in the brand's product into the whole story, but the product was a sidekick. The main focus was on the brand. So that's how. So whether it's a B2B or a B2C, we are talking to people. Emotions are universal. We just need to identify the right emotions and the triggers. I'll take second question. It's from Jigar Patel. He's a founder of Blair Science. I hope Jigar, I pronounced it right. He says emotion versus functionality. What is more important, and how can we combine both to tell a compelling brand story which floats on its own without forced media buying? Great question, Jigar. So, brand story is primarily about emotion, not so much about functionality, as I have mentioned. Uh, So let me give you a quick example. So in fact, we are working currently with an automotive brand, and they have a set of bikes in a certain 166cc category. They do everything. They do the above the line, below the line advertising to publicize the features of their bike. But the brand story that we came up was about youth icons and youth achievers, people who are in their 80s, who are between 18 to 30, and who've achieved something in different walks of life, and we are making stories on these people. The reason behind it is that this aligns with the aspirations of their target market. So to answer your question, it's always about emotions. Functionality, if it's really important, it can be packaged as an answer to the problems of your target audience and not as a specific product from your brand. So I was able to answer. Uh, we are really short of time, and since we are very particular about our time commitments, we had promised a 15 to 20-minute webinar or webcast, and we are about to make sure that we stick to it. So, guys, thank you so much for making time on this Friday evening. If you have any questions, you know where to reach us. Have a great weekend and good night. Bye.